who's going to give us a quick update or a brief story of the Brazilian crypto wars. And Diego, I see that you're ready to roll, so I think I'm just going to ask you to do so. Is that all right?
Yes, I hope you can see my screen.
We can see your screen. It's great.
Yeah, so I've been living in Denmark for almost 3 years now, but before that I was a faculty member at the University of Campinas in Brazil. And during my time there, I had some fun. I got involved in some high-profile cases, both in the security analysis of the voting machine used in the country, but also in the crypto backdoor debate. So this is a bit of history with my personal perspective. So Professor Anderson has already explained to us how the first crypto wars in the US played along, right? Starting in the 90s with the government trying to control civilian encryption through the Clever chip. We need to remind ourselves that at the time, encryption was still a tightly controlled technology, and governments always used this excuse that deception capabilities for law enforcement were under risk. So the modern version of that debate in the US now is called going dark, right? Where again, law enforcement claims that there is an inability of investigating crime or terrorist activity because of widespread encryption, especially on messaging apps, cloud storage, and so on. And terrorism has been used as the initial emphasis or the initial excuse. But if you keep track of how the debate is moving forward, it suddenly, or it quickly got extended to other crimes. And a major milestone, of course, is the Apple versus FBI case that I recommend you to read about. It's fascinating. So in Brazil, we got the cheap knockoff version, as sometimes it happens. So there, the whole focus was on messaging apps, or at least it started from messaging apps, especially WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is installed in 99% of the cell phones in the country, there are more cell phones in Brazil than people. And again, the justification was the federal police in particular cannot wiretap WhatsApp calls or messages anymore for law enforcement purposes. So the justification was around serious criminal activity, especially drug dealing and child sex abuse materials. And the reason for that is in Brazil, there is not much worry about national security or terrorism attacks or signals intelligence or any of that. So the most populist, let's say, excuse is really organized crime and high profile crime in a way. So, and it started in a quite interesting way with several judges requesting plain text from WhatsApp for investigation purposes. And actually WhatsApp ended up being blocked 4 times countrywide in 2015 and 2016. These were declared by different judges across the country due to its inability to fulfill a request for plain text messages. And the blocking itself was done on the grounds of a recently approved data privacy law, which is quite counterintuitive. So post-Snowden, Brazil approved the data privacy law called Marco Civil that actually made the rounds internationally because it was a quite advanced piece of legislation. And on this data privacy law, there was a mechanism that the government could block a service if it didn't respect users' privacy. So the judges interpreted that blocking mechanism as applying to any inability to fulfill a government or investigation request. So then the matter scaled up to the Supreme Court after a legal battle between WhatsApp and the lower courts. And basically several entities questioned the constitutionality of the blocks, especially because the legal provision was for protecting privacy, not hurting or penalizing companies trying to protect privacy in a way. And because the blocks were a consequence of encryption, of course, WhatsApp claimed that it could not fulfill the requests for data because of end-to-end encryption. Then the Supreme Court had to have a say on this, as many times it happens in Brazil. Being a small country, there are many, or not as small, of course, being a young country, there are many matters that are still not crystallizing in law. So interestingly, the Brazilian constitution has a provision for wiretapping of phone calls, but not of encrypted internet connections. And the interpretation of the mechanism there doesn't really allow the government to determine that for end-to-end encryption. So then, obviously, the quick solution comes up, and the government and the judicial system in particular, the Public Prosecution Office, starts pointing out that backdoors are the solution. We should mandate WhatsApp to introduce backdoors so that these government requests can be fulfilled. And then the technical community got in panic, and we knew that winter was coming. So But then something quite surprising happened. The Supreme Court was visibly clueless on what to do because the judges didn't know really what encryption was about, the going dark debate, how the situation was in other countries, how pieces of legislation were setting up frameworks, legal frameworks in other countries. So instead of just doing a one-sided decision as it happens several times, they announced a series of public hearings. So in these hearings, entities from government, from the judicial system, academics, also companies and NGOs could make their case pro or against backdoors or encryption in general, or the legal protection of strong encryption in the country. So it was a somewhat interactive event where we could make presentations, making our cases, and also interact with the justices. We couldn't ask provocative questions in between the groups or the presenters, but we could answer questions from the Supreme Court judges. And of course, there were many, many lawyers. There were few academics from the tech, with a tech background. Most of the other participants and attendees were just lawyers. No offense, I'm just reporting. So it was absolutely surprising that this happened because, again, this is not really frequent at the Brazilian Supreme Court, which tends to give quite one-sided decisions on polemic, controversial matters. So I was, of course, on pro-encryption field together with a few colleagues, and I made a localized defense of a strong encryption based on keys on the doormats, applying some of the principles there to the context of the country. So the main claim was that privacy is a collective right. So encryption is an enabler of that collective right for plain citizens. I pointed out how privacy and public safety are not in opposition. This is a false dilemma played out by governments to take advantage of our emotions and our rationality, and how these backdoors or any government interference in encryption will actually be both ineffective and dangerous. Ineffective in the sense that, well, the criminals can just switch to other different solutions. They can design their own, and there is evidence that some crime rings in Brazil have actually built their own apps for communication, for encrypted communication, underground apps, of course. And also dangerous in the sense that, well, the law enforcement itself uses encrypted apps and messaging apps to communicate and coordinate activities. So, of course, this backdoor, mandated backdoor, could backfire on the institutions, the entities requesting that backdoor in the first place. So I also claim that a mandated backdoor poses a higher risk for a tech-dependent country. Brazil is not a technologically advanced country, of course, so it relies a lot on imported crypto or technology in general, and mandating backdoors could also backfire because of that. So the point was Brazil should instead focus on modernizing law enforcement so it can work despite encryption being widespread or being in place. And one particular note, I got asked by one of the Supreme Court justices, what is authenticated encryption? And that was really hard to answer. So at the end of these public hearings, it wasn't clear if it was effective. Of course, the justices could not put forward their views. They just said, oh, we recognize now after watching our presentations that the issue is much more complex than we thought at the beginning of this. So this was in 2017. After 3 years now, there are 11 Supreme Court justices in the current composition of the court. 2 of them already voted in. So the first vote was pro-encryption, quoting many of the arguments on the risks of backdoors to internet security, that actually the government should work to improve the security of the internet and as it becomes infrastructure to society itself, and not undermine its security with requests for investigations that can be done perhaps less intrusively by other means. The second vote was again pro-encryption, but was a more fundamental rights vote. It was again focused on encryption as an enabler of freedom of speech and other kinds of freedoms that are guaranteed by the Brazilian constitution. So I'm very positive that these votes will be influential because these were votes cast by the 2 Supreme Court justices that attended through the entire public hearing. And since they are the justices in charge of the process, they typically have a higher influence. It's common for the other justices to just vote along with them. It's not that common to have dissenting votes, but yeah, we have to wait and see. As of now, the score, if this was a football match, would be in favor of encryption 2-0. But there are nine more goals to be scored. So the main takeaways here is we were absolutely shocked and surprised that in these votes or these arguments, our expert views were taken in consideration, sometimes even quoted directly. Also, pieces of the keys and the doormats essay were also crystallized in these votes, which was quite interesting to see. So I would say perhaps it's too early, but there is still some hope for legal protection of strong encryption in Latin America. Typically, decisions in Brazil influence the neighbors. So we hope that that happens in case that strong encryption ends up being protected. And I like that this public hearings was a good example of a multi-stakeholder process that was done right. And it managed to inform the Supreme Court judge on a critical matter for the country. And I hope the outcome again is positive. Thank you.